The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second part of Arizona Merit. And we have Dr. Joe O'Reilly, Executive Director for Student Achievement Support with us today. But before I introduce him, just one housekeeping item is please note that if you have questions as we go through the slide deck today, please go ahead and type them in. We'll take those questions at the end and we'll get through as many as we can with the time that's allotted. Without further ado, Dr. Joe O'Reilly, if you remember, he was with us in April to talk about what to expect from Arizona Merit. Now the results are in and we're in phase 2. And once again, ASBA is extremely appreciative and grateful to Joe, who's one of the state's foremost education psychometricians and assessment experts, that he has once again been willing to share his expertise with all of us throughout the state. So without further ado, Dr. O'Reilly.
Good morning, everybody. We're getting very close to the debut of the AzMERIT results for your districts. So we thought it'd be a good idea to share with you more information that will help you and your district have a smoother rollout. The debut begins in a little over 2 weeks when you receive school and district level reports electronically, as well as a data file. About 2 weeks after that, you receive the paper family reports, and you'll then distribute those to your students and parents. And sometime in November, the state will release the results by school and district, or at least that's the plan now. It's tentative and subject to change. The last webinar we covered what the items look like, how the performance levels were going to be set, how we thought the results would turn out, and what the implications were for schools and students. Today, I just want to repeat 2 points from that prior webinar to help you better explain your results. And then I'll describe exactly how the performance standards were set and by who, what the results actually are, and then cover the family report in communicating AzMERIT results to your communities. So first, some background. AzMERIT was created just for Arizona using a blueprint that reflects Arizona's standards. The exact test we gave was not given in any other state. However, we did use test items created for Utah. We chose the specific items to match our blueprint, so our test was unique. But some of those same items may have, and definitely probably were, given in Utah, Florida, Tennessee, or other states. Some people say that the items written for Arizona have to be written for Arizona by Arizonans. We've been testing over 40 years, and most of these tests, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, ASAP, California Achievement Test, Stanford 9, Stanford 10, Terra Nova, etc., used items created somewhere else. And that was fine with everyone. It was only recently that we started using Arizona written items on AIMS. And that seemed to be a sleight of hand technique in that at the same time we moved to say all our items are written by Arizonans, the percent correct was lowered from about 72% to about 59% correct. And actually that puts us a little behind. That's one reason there's such a big discrepancy between our old results and our new results. What's important is that we have good items that are valid and unbiased. You can't have items that ask Arizona students about unfamiliar concepts, such as sows and sellers on the Iowa test, or that cover a 4th grade skill on a 3rd grade test. What is important is that the items are reviewed and determined to be appropriate for Arizona. So let me just remind you of how AIMS differs from AzMERIT. On AIMS, we have all multiple choice, all 4 options. You have a 25% chance of getting it right just by chance. AzMERIT had some of those same type of items, but it also had multiple choice items with more options and more than one correct choice. For example, a student may see 8 options and be told, pick 2 or pick all that are correct. That is not multiple guess with 25% chance of getting it right. And there are short answer questions like this one, where a student has to create a formula. They're much more cognitively demanding items. So when we say AIMS and AzMERIT should not be compared, it's because of significant differences such as these in difficulty and differences in content because of the new standards. Thought I'd also share with you, you might find interesting, we surveyed our teachers and some of our students about what did they think about the test they took this past spring. What they told us was almost 8 in 10 teachers felt that AzMERIT was harder than Ames, while about half of the students felt that way. Everyone felt it mostly covered the content that was taught up to that point, although there were things that were going to be taught after the testing was over. Teachers thought the format of the items were more difficult than the students thought they were, but many students obviously also found them difficult. So you can see 52% of junior high students, 45% of elementary students thought the format was difficult. And the majority of all groups want to use computers going forward, with students being much more positive. 2 out of 3 students saying, yes, let's use computers, where only about half of the teachers were saying that. But one of the things teachers said is the administrative testing, collecting booklets, counting them in and out, being responsible for any lost booklet or answer sheet, etc., was much easier and less time intensive when they used computer testing. So let me talk a little bit about how the performance levels were set. I serve on ADE's National Technical Advisory Committee, and ADE invited the advisory committee to observe the standard setting. So John Wilson from Tempe Elementary, Jay Midyett from Amphitheater, and I spent a week this summer observing the standard setting. We had open access to everything. We could go into any room at any time and observe how it was being set and what teachers were being told as they set them. Spoiler alert, the bottom line is they were set by teachers who were experienced in those grade levels and subjects. Before the standard setting process began, ADE and teachers developed performance level descriptors for each individual standard that describes students who are solidly proficient, highly proficient, partially proficient, and minimally proficient. And you can see this is by standard, so it is very, very detailed. You see those black vertical lines between each performance standard? That was not defined in the process. That's the border between partially proficient, proficient, or minimally proficient and partially proficient. That's what the teachers did this summer. They came in and defined the boundary or cut point between performance levels. The PLD document that you see here helped them do that. By the way, if you're in a district or in a charter, when I asked the teachers who were setting the boundaries how they were going to get their students up to mastery, they told me they were going to focus and teach by this document, not by their textbooks. They found it very helpful for identifying and describing what students know and should be able to do. So how did they set these cut points between performance levels? I have to tell you, we were told not to take pictures, and so, but I happened to get there early and took a couple of pictures before I was told not to take any. But I wanted to show you the luxurious accommodations the teachers spent their weekend. Here's a windowless room. It happened to be in the Hyatt, but it could be any conference room anywhere. You can see that there are 3 tables set up. There are 4 computers per table, so 1 for each teacher. Each room covered only 1 subject area, English language arts or math, and 1 grade span. So this room was grades 9 through 11 math. There were also rooms for grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in math, and a similar set of rooms for English language arts. So the teachers came in, and the first thing they did was review the performance level descriptors, which we just saw a slide of. They looked through them and discussed what was expected for a student who was solidly in each of those categories. Then they took the same tests the students took. Next, they developed a description of a just barely student, a student who would be just over the boundary or the cut point. They developed their description first individually, then came to consensus as a table of 4 teachers, and then as a room of 12 teachers. Their discussions were very detailed, reasoned, and kind of passionate about students and what they could do. To you and me, their discussions were in the weeds. They were very detailed, very descriptive of what students could do, but these teachers really could describe the students at their grade levels. After that prep work was done, and they've kind of decided what a just barely student was, then they started setting cut points. They did it using something called the bookmark method. They were given the items in order of difficulty from the easiest to the hardest. It used to be these actually were actually in a book, and the teacher would place a physical bookmark in the book at the item he or she thought a just barely student would get right, and a student just below that would not get right. Now it's done on a computer, but the process is the same. In addition to seeing the item, the teachers also saw information about other tests when it was appropriate. For example, an item of this level of difficulty, they might get is equivalent to approaches a standard on AIMS, or is equivalent to the proficiency level on NAEP, or college and career ready on the ACT College and Career Ready Index. They were told this information about the other tests was to provide, quote, context for their standard setting decisions, and was, unquote, it was not intended for them to set it at that level. It was just to inform the teachers. The teachers set their bookmarks individually, and then as a table of 4, and then as a group. They did this for proficient, then the boundary with highly proficient, and then the boundary with partially proficient and minimally proficient. And once they had done that for one of the areas, they saw the impact of their standard setting cut point. How many students would fall in each category given their decisions. They were then asked to review their decision and make any adjustments they thought were necessary. You would think that what they would do then is when they saw that 44% of the students at third grade were in reading were minimally proficient, maybe they would adjust it down. It really didn't happen. There were few, if any, changes based on that impact data. What I heard the teachers say is that they were setting it for should, not would. What should students know and be able to do, not what would students do now in their classrooms. People ask me if the fix was in. When John Wilson talked to his principals at the start of the school year, they said, wait a second, before you start, John, we all have one question for you. Tell us the truth. Were these levels set by ADE or AIR? And he said, no, they really were set by the teachers. I saw it that way also. I saw a very teacher-driven approach to setting performance levels. They put a structure in place. They had the teachers think deeply about what a just barely student was. They gave them direction from the state board in terms of they wanted comparable to other states and reflect readiness for the next grade level or eventually college and career. And then they trusted the teachers. After it was all over, I asked the Mesa teachers who participated what they thought. And this is one representative answer, but all of them said, yes, I felt my voice was heard in setting these standards. They didn't feel pressure. They felt they drove the situation. And when the recommendations were made to the state board, they accepted the teachers' recommendations with no changes, in all subjects, in all grade levels, and at all performance levels. So if someone asks who decided this was passing, you can tell them experienced, expert Arizona teachers did. They were special ed teachers, they were charter teachers, they were traditional school teachers, they were people who had a lot of experience in teaching. They were teachers that had high hopes and expectations for Arizona students and for their students that they see in class every day. I think they set a big challenge for themselves and for all of us. In our last webinar, we said we expected lower passing rates. And we expected it for a number of reasons. One was, other than third grade, students haven't been exposed to the new standards throughout their education. As we showed with the items, students must show their work and reasoning on some of the items, which is more difficult. And there's less familiarity with the new item formats. So these are some reasons why the scores were expected to be lower. But the real reason we expected them to decrease is because expectations have increased. We expected the scores to be falling because the expectations are soaring. That's the message we should be sharing. And that's the story you should be telling. What we expect students to know and do and how we measure it is very different than with AIMS. In fact, several states have refused to compare their new test results to their old tests because they're so different, the comparison is misleading. California recently took 15 years of test data off their website so that it would be harder for people to compare the new PARCC assessment results to the prior assessment. The teachers who saw the performance levels, they saw what passing was on AIMS, and they blew right past that. If we were at the difficulty of level of AIMS meets, we would probably have the same high passing rates like we used to. But these teachers focused on what students should do given the new standards. So scores are falling because expectations are soaring. Expectations really are moving across the country from the NAEP basic level closer to proficient. NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's given every 2 to 4 years in different subject areas. They take a random sample of students throughout the state and throughout other states and come up with the nation's report card, they call themselves. This graph shows the most recent NAEP results for 4th grade and 8th grade reading and math. The yellow bar is NAEP basic, so students who are basic, proficient, or highly proficient. In reading in 4th grade, it was 60% last time we had NAEP. But the NAEP proficient and highly proficient students, we only had 28% of the students at that level. Okay. So 10 years ago, passing on almost every state test was in the basic level on NAEP. You could really see that when you compared basic to the state results. People said proficient on NAEP, that's an aspirational goal, but we really don't expect students to get there. So we're not going to set our state assessment and our expectations at proficient. As you can see, Arizona students didn't do so well on proficient. Well, now the states are setting their tests, as Arizona has, at the proficient level of NAEP. So we're going from an aspirational goal to what I'm going to be calling a perspirational goal, because it's going to take a lot of hard work to get our students proficient at the rates we used to have on AIMS when it was set much lower. What we saw with NAEP, we can also see if we compare AIMS passing rates to AzMERIT proficiency rates. As we discussed earlier, AIMS is a very different test than AzMERIT. So comparing the results as if they were similar tests is inappropriate. AzMERIT is our new baseline. However, I do compare them here for you so you can see how different the experience of parents will be this year compared to past years on AIMS. The gold bars represent meets and exceeds on AIMS, and the red bars are proficient and highly proficient on AzMERIT. Okay, if we look at 10th grade reading and 10th grade ELA on AzMERIT, you can see that last year, 86% of the families received the good news that their students met the standards. This year, it's almost the reverse. 30% will get the good news that their student is proficient, and 70% will be told their child is partially or minimally proficient in English language arts. From a policy point of view, this is good news, because if we maintain the same passing rate, that would indicate we really have not raised our expectations. A drop shows that we're expecting much more from students, teachers, schools, and families. Long term, this should result in more options and opportunities for students and a brighter future. It does not show that students, teachers, and schools are suddenly failures. By the way, in the states that are about a year ahead of us, they do see increases the second year and the third year that they were giving the assessments. This drop isn't unique to Arizona. We see it in Pennsylvania, in Illinois, in Delaware, in Connecticut, in California, in San Diego. The headlines all across the country are talking about lower results, and we're getting the same headlines here. So it may happen everywhere, it may be good policy-wise, but parents will be concerned. Many students who've been meeting the standards suddenly will be partially or minimally proficient. So we need to have plans to how to address that with parents. And one of the things we're focusing on are teachers, because teachers have the personal relationship with parents, and we're trying to prepare them to answer parents' questions. So how do we expect parents to react? The communication experts say parents respond in one of two ways. One group of parents will ask, okay, what can I do to help my child? What do we need to do better on this in the future? The other reaction that parents have had, according to these communication professionals, is let's blame the test, let's blame the standards, let's blame the schools. That's the problem. Blame the standard setting. It's not the student's performance. And I have some news for the communication professionals. There's a third group. They're the people who don't look in the backpack, that don't respond to requests to participate in focus groups, and they just say whatever. And we have to be able to address each of those groups of parents as we roll out the AzMERIT results. So let's talk about what we are going to roll out and what parents will see. This is the math family report. You can see it's blue colors. That barrel chart is blue. On the ELA, it's going to be brown, so there's slightly color difference. The top left, it tells the parents about the assessment the student took. The top right, it describes what's in the report. Below is the barrel chart showing the student's performance, the school, district, and state averages, what the cut points are for each of the performance levels, and a scale score. The math scale scores are in the 3000s. The ELA scale scores are in the 2000s. Those scales were chosen because those particular scales haven't really been used in Arizona much, and there's no inherent meaning in those numbers. Okay. But it's the scale that they used. And you can see a little summary of the student's overall performance and readiness on the right-hand side. On the back of this sheet, we get the results by standard. In this case, ratios, equations, number system, and geometry and statistics. At the top, you can see it tells you the scoring categories, below mastery, at or near mastery, and above mastery for each of those standards. For each of the standards, there's a symbol that gives you an indication of are you above, at, or below mastery. There's a description of what was actually assessed within that area. And then there's a description of the student's performance. I should note these are in English only, but in cooperation with ADE, which provided the report content, we are translating the content and designing an interpretation guide that we will make available to anyone to download, and ADE will post it for you to download also. We're still in the process of doing that. AIMS was never translated either, but what's different here is we do not have, this is a number-free zone. There are no scores. There are descriptions. That probably informs the parents a little bit better. So the parents need to understand what it will say. So we're translating it into Spanish. We don't have translations into Navajo or other languages. Let me show you how different this is than what parents are used to. Here's a strand and concept report from AIMS. Parents may not know what all those strands and concepts mean, but they probably have a sense of 50% is poor, 90% is good. And percent correct is provided as well as the number possible and correct for each strand and concept. So parents really need to understand what the performance descriptions mean. Here's the ELA scoring categories, and you can see this is more brown than blue. The categories are reading for information, reading for literature, writing, and language. What's different from the prior one is they've added a section about the essay. So you get, for your essay, you get a score from a 0 to a 4, or a 0 to a 2, and a description of the student's performance in one of 3 parts of the essay. Again, it's in English only, and we're translating it into Spanish, and we'll make that available. In addition, the state is providing everybody with a family report guide, which shows you what is on the report and what it means. This will be in English and Spanish. I assume English on one side, Spanish on the other. So the question I get from a lot of people is, what are the 3 to 5 things you'd emphasize when communicating the results? Generally, this is what I would say from a district point of view. First, the performance levels were set by veteran Arizona teachers. They had high expectations for students and focused on what students should be able to do. It was not set by some outside group or people who don't know students at our grade levels and the standards. The results we're receiving is a new baseline. For the first time, we've given AzMERIT. It's completely different than AIMS, so comparing the results to AIMS is really not appropriate. But we have to keep in mind, teachers hadn't seen the test before. Students had only access to practice items a few weeks before the test. So some scores are somewhat lower than we would have expected once people are familiar with the test item and they see that kind of format throughout the year. So it's the baseline from which we need to improve. The important thing about these results is not that scores are falling from AIMS, but that expectations are soaring. And communicating what students know and should be able to do is going to be an important part of communicating the results. I'd also let people know that this is not unique to Arizona. New, more rigorous tests are being introduced across the country with the PARC Consortium, the Smarter Balance Consortium, and states that are giving their own assessments. And other states see a similar drop in proficiency when they gave the new assessment. So what you want to communicate is going to be based on what your parents are likely to ask you and what your teachers are likely to hear from parents. So let me share with you some of the resources for communicating with parents. The Arizona Department of Ed has an AzMERIT portal where they put lots of resources for you to use as you communicate. You can see that they have AzMERIT information, information about AzMERIT reporting, which you can see I dove into, and there you can see some sample reports that are available right now. Expect More Arizona has really focused on how they can help get the word out to parents. They've really stepped up and done a good job so far. You can find a one-page parent letter. You can find grade level expectation guides written for parents. You can find a video that makes an analogy between an annual assessment and going to the doctor for an annual checkup. And they have a blog that addresses some issues that you may have to address with parents. So I've given you the URLs down below so you can use their site and use their materials to communicate with your parents. And districts, we're going to have a lot of materials posted. We don't yet have all these things posted, but we'll have a parent video, a teacher video, frequently asked questions for teachers, a trifold brochure, Spanish translations of the family report wording, and other materials as they're developed. And feel free to repurpose some of our materials for your own needs. So hopefully now you can answer these questions. The performance levels were set by veteran dedicated Arizona teachers. The results were expected and were like other states and our past NAEP results. Rather than a bad thing, these results proved expectations have soared and what's expected of students in schools is much higher today. The real scary challenge actually facing all of us is not the release of these scores next month. It's significantly moving the passing rate up within the next 2 to 3 years. That's a challenge we really have to start worrying about and tackling now so we see improvement from our baseline. You now know what the family report looks like and how it differs from past reports. And hopefully we've shared some resources for communicating from ADE, Expect More Arizona, Mesa, and other districts that will help you as you communicate to your communities. Finally, I've included my email and phone number here, so feel free to contact me if I can answer any questions or be of help. Several of you did so after the last webinar, so I'm sincere and I'll get back to you if I can answer your questions or send you in a different direction. With that, I'll turn it back to Janice.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. A lot of great information in a short amount of time, and I think it's very, very appreciated. We're going to start with some of the questions, but want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded and available on a YouTube site by this afternoon. We will also be providing the PowerPoint in a PDF format to the participants here today, but also will be going out through our Salsa network where many of you saw the invite there. And so we will be sure to get all of that information to you because there's a lot contained on those slides. So first question, Dr. O'Reilly, going back to the NAEP graph you had on 4th grade math, it talks about 82% were on basic and 40% were on proficient. Shouldn't that add up to 100%, or how does NAEP come up with their percentages?
NAEP has four levels, like our assessment. They have below basic, basic, proficient, and highly proficient. What's not in that graph is the below basic students. So you'd have to add in the below basic students to get to 100%. Okay. So the basic includes the students who are basic, proficient, and highly proficient. The proficient column includes proficient, highly proficient students.
So their proficient's double counted
right
on that. Okay. Next question. I'm concerned about teachers commenting on following the document versus the curriculum, which sounds a little bit like teaching to the test. How do we use data effectively to help students that are struggling when we don't have that data yet?
The teachers, if they use the document, the very detailed performance level descriptors, they're teaching to the standard. They're teaching to the expectation. They're not teaching to a specific test item. and there's a distinction there. So they're looking at, I need to get my students to this level in this area of ratios. I need to get to my students in this level with probability. So they're teaching to the skill, not to the test.
Well, maybe we hit a little bit on the October 6th when schools and charters receive the information at the district level. Maybe go into a little bit, because that's different than the family items that we discussed today.
Right. When I have not seen the reports that we're going to get, but I assume they'll be by the district. The district report will be by school. The school will be by student and by teacher, probably, maybe by grade level. And it will show us how students did and what % of our students are at different proficiency levels. And I would not be surprised if we have schools with 0% proficient, or certainly a number of schools with 10% or fewer proficient or highly proficient, given how schools do on A's. So those will be coming out, and it will give you somewhat more detailed information. But I would expect that teachers have had their students for several weeks now. They know what their students know and can do relative to the standards, if they know the standards. So I would trust what a teacher has assessed, and a teacher's looked at what students know and can do at this point. This 1 year we got the results late. Next year we should get them towards the end of May, hopefully before students leave, and then we'll have more time to work on it. But like the parent report, we're not going to get information as detailed as perhaps we had with Ames with those numbers. So I'm looking forward to see what exactly we do get with those reports.
And that goes into the next question of, is the wait time for AzMERIT going to be less? Why do we have to wait so long? Is this a first year issue?
Yeah, it was just a first year issue. What we had to do was set the standards, and we had that summer activity, and once that activity was done and the state board said, okay, this is where the cut points will be, it took about 8 weeks to score them and get the reports back. In the future, now that the cut points have been set, we don't have to wait for that process, and we don't have to wait for the state board to approve it. So as soon as the assessments are in, they can be scored and categorized by level. So the ETA that I saw in kind of the response to the RFP was May 20 something, roughly. So we will get them faster in the future.
And you hit on this a little bit, but they're concerned about, there's so many refugees coming into our state from so many countries. Will information become available in those languages also in the future?
That would be something for ADE to answer, and that is not in the budget. That was not in the RFP. So that would have to be a communication or a discussion at the department with the state board, because as you saw, the results are really descriptions. They're not numbers. And so the reason why we were translating it is because we want to meet the needs of our parents. And you raise a good point about translating the other ones for, who knows, I would not be surprised if we get a number of Syrian refugees. And we don't have people who speak Syrian right now in our district, but we would have to meet those people's needs. So that is an issue.
Well, and thank you for your leadership, at least translating to Spanish, so at least school districts are stepping up on that to share resources. Will the Arizona Merit Assessment be tied to high school graduation requirements, and will high school students need to pass AzMERIT in order to graduate?
At the moment, no. There was a board rule that the AzMERIT results would be included with student grades, and and student grades are required to graduate. Therefore, that's the role AzMERIT plays. I think last session there was a bill saying AzMERIT couldn't be part of students' grades, so there's a little bit of a conflict there. We'll have to see how that plays out and how they will be used. But unlike Ames, you do not have to pass it to graduate.
And maybe this is a good opportunity to say it's a different assessment.
It's a completely different assessment. Yeah. And the same goes with third grade Move On When Reading. That's been put in abeyance for 2 years, and right now they'll identify the 3% of students like we had with Ames that are the lowest performing students on reading, but the state board has called for people to come together to study the results, to study the issues, and address how we move forward with Move On When Reading. That decision hasn't been made yet, but that's something that's coming up in the coming year.
And that is actually the next question. So last year's third graders who don't reach the appropriate level are required to receive interventions in the fourth grade year. What is that cutoff level, and how will required interventions be determined?
Districts were supposed to use something other than AzMERIT to come up with, identify those students and meet those students' needs. ADE will identify the bottom 3% of students, and the districts will get that information, and the expectation is those students will receive some sort of remediation. But if you look at the results, statewide, 44% of the students are minimally proficient. If you're saying a student is minimally proficient, we can't just ignore those students. Retaining 44% doesn't make any sense, but not providing them some sort of intervention when we say they're minimally proficient also doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem the right thing to do. So I think we're really going to have to think through how do we deliver services to those students? How do we make sure those students get to be proficient readers?
Where can someone find the performance level descriptors document?
I had the URL on my slide. It's on the ADE site under assessments, and they were set in June. So if you just look for performance level descriptors, it's set sometime in June. You should be able to find it there.
You referenced some feedback from teachers and students regarding how they felt about the assessment. What's the source for that information?
I sent a survey to every Mesa teacher who gave the assessment, and I told them I don't want to know anything about specific questions. Don't tell me anything I shouldn't know about the test, but tell them just, are we prepared? What did you think? Because I've heard a lot of criticisms about the assessment one way or the other, and I felt the classroom teacher could tell us better than anyone else. And then we also made an online assessment available for students, and we said to the teachers, if you want to give your students these surveys, feel free. And so they're Mesa teachers, Mesa students. The high school teachers did not give them to their students, so I don't have high school student feedback.
We continue to say that AIMS and AzMERIT should not be compared. However, Arizona has chosen to show growth scores from AIMS to AzMERIT. What kind of validity does this have given all we've talked about today? I'd
be preferential in my book to not do the growth scores, but we use student growth percentiles, and there are two components to that. You group like students together on one test. So you do them from highest to lowest. And then you group them on the AIMS and say, here's the highest performing group, here's the next highest performing group, and then when you give the AzMERIT, you rank the kids from the highest AzMERIT score to the lowest AzMERIT score. So you're really doing their growth based on how they did relative to comparable kids on the AzMERIT. So you can do that. And I would prefer doing AzMERIT to AzMERIT, but that's a decision the department has to make, and that's something that's probably required under the agreement with the federal government in terms of how we do our accountability. And so it's not inappropriate to do it. And if you talk to the person who came up with student growth percentiles, he said, yeah, that is an appropriate use. So since we're really focusing on AzMERIT performance, and we're just using AIMS to group like kids together, you may get a similar result as you would on if you did AzMERIT.
And I think that was one of the reasons that Senate Bill 1289 that was passed last year was to give some buffer zone for as it relates to statewide accountability, as it relates to teacher-principal evaluation and all of that. So hopefully we get to the point where, well, not hopefully, we will get to the point where we have now this baseline AzMERIT and then future assessment there. Do you know if we'll receive performance data down to the standard level?
I haven't seen the district and school level reports yet, so I don't know. We'll probably get something similar to the percent of students who are at high mastery, low mastery, at or near mastery. So I assume we'll get some percentage similar to that.
Since the data is not embargoed, when is Mesa and other districts releasing their district level scores to the public? Before ADE's November release?
What we're hoping for is some direction from ADE before we get those reports. So we don't have, we're hoping to get a final word. We have a tentative plan now, and we'll see what happens. We would like to digest the results a little bit before they get released publicly. We'd like our schools to have a chance to look at their results and think about them so that they can give a reasoned response when people ask about them. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And we're still waiting for final word from AD as to what exactly the plan is for public release.
Yeah, and just, we're trying to, because this would basically be the first year that doesn't happen, and so we're trying to at least work through the proper channels to get that alleviated before we have to come up with a plan B, right? Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. O'Reilly, for each standard there is a set bookmark for proficiency. How is this put together to get one final score?
The performance on each item is, and there's a difficulty level for each item, they look at the overall performance on those items and come up with a scale score. So then that scale score is compared to the performance levels to see where does it fall. So items that are more difficult kind of give you more points than items that are less difficult in contributing to your scale score. So they calculate the scale score based on your performance on each of the items on the test, and then they take that scale score and say, okay, that falls within this performance level. I don't know if that's clear.
Is there a possibility to review the slide comparing Ames proficient scores to proficiency on AzMERIT? I think that will be done. I think we're able to do that once we send out the PowerPoint for folks on that. What is the estimated time for Mesa Public Schools to do the Spanish translation?
I think we have everything translated as of this morning. I was going back and forth with the translator. We're checking with ADE. So we have, I think it's like 40 different documents with different translations because each component of that report is a different document.
How about this? We'll make the commitment once all the documents are available to let folks know that those resources are available in totality. Would that work?
Yeah, and what we're doing is we're having our graphic artists in our print shop put it together so that a fourth grade parent for fourth grade math will see the translation of all the components, and they'll have to figure out, okay, I am at high mastery, so I want to read and that's on my English version, I have to look at the green plus on this report because there's a green plus, there's a check mark, and there's an exclamation point, and they have to pick out which mastery level their report has. So we're going to put that together so it will look good for parents, and it will look like it's part of the same package that they're getting anyway. And so I would almost wait for that than the actual translation and then try and do it yourself.
Is there any type of report that will show how students performed on specific standards?
You saw it. It's the back page. That's what you get for each of the standards in math and English language arts. So you get the symbol, you get the description of what was assessed, and the description of how that student performed on what was assessed.
Is there a minimum number of days that a student has to be registered for the data to be reflected in the school's data?
What comes back from the testing company would be everyone who is assessed, or should be everyone who's assessed. I think this question gets to who counts for accountability, and that has to be determined separately. They usually have looked at students who are continuously enrolled throughout the school year, who are there within the first 10 days and continuously enrolled. I assume that has not changed, but that's an accountability question, not a AzMERIT question, really.
Okay, communications question. It was said in the presentation that teachers are the individuals with close relationships with parents. Is Mesa leaving the communication up to their teachers, or are you also having parent nights?
We're layering the communication. We've asked the teachers and given the teachers some information about parent-teacher nights, which are happening, unfortunately, before the AzMERIT comes out. We will have some school level, we'll have some district level communication. We have ways of communicating with our parents electronically by phone, cell phone, text, that sort of thing. So we're going to try and communicate a lot of different ways with our parents to get the message across, because someone may pay attention to one way but not another. Someone may not want to look at it as something the district sends, but if the teacher tells the parent something, they may listen to that. So what we're trying to do is communicate with the parents every way we can, because this is going to be a big news story that they're going to hear about. And this is totally new. The format's new, the test is new, and we want them to understand what they're getting as best we can.
Is Arizona going to write their own test questions? If so, when will this occur and how will this impact comparative data?
The plan is that all of the test questions in the future will be Arizona-created test questions. I believe they've already started on that, and so they're doing that. They'll go through the same process in vetting that the current questions had to go through, and looking for bias, looking for how well each distractor does, and that sort of thing. So it should not affect the test itself, and they'll be taking items that match our blueprint and probably at similar levels of difficulty. And even though the cut areas have been determined, they will do a post-equating of every test, because the test will have some slightly different items, and they'll just, as a check, to make sure we're getting the same kind of results we got in the past. And we're not suddenly going up one year and down another year. So they're making sure that there's it's equal or similar from one year to the next.
I think you answered this a little bit earlier, but still a little confusion. Do we know if an Arizona merit score will be worth a certain percentage of a course grade? You talked about that with the state board.
Yeah, we don't. I don't think we know, because the state board has a rule, and then we have kind of conflicting legislation that was passed. And so I'm waiting to see some direction as to what that means, and whether it will count for, or does the law supersede the state board, or will they come up with some other way of using AzMERIT?
So we at least know this year.
Right, it
it's
won't.
Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any discussion about linking the AzMERIT scale scores directly to the NAEP scale for the purpose of national comparisons?
The NAEP and the ACT, College and Career Ready, and all the other assessments, the PISA test at 10th grade, Smarter Balanced assessments, that was linked for the purpose of standard setting and to inform the teachers. I don't think there's any plan to do any linking with those tests going in the future, or making any kind of comparisons nationally. I think the way most of the states have turned out, we're probably in the same neighborhood of our cut scores as Smarter Balanced, as probably as Park, although it wasn't linked to Park. So, but an exact comparison, I don't think there's any plans to do that.
We have a couple of move on when reading questions. One person asked, we've received information from ADE that students will be retained if they are not proficient in third grade reading as it relates to move on when reading this year. Do you have information to the contrary?
I believe it was suspended for this year. Isn't that your understanding?
Yeah, there's still a FARS fall below, and there's still an issue as far as what that item is. I think the question really becomes more about the intervention services that are provided, and if there's a comparison, as you had talked about, the issue was to find a similar or comparable assessment that assesses how well
that the district used.
Yeah.
And the bottom 3% of readers, at least in Mesa, are almost all special ed and ELL, English language learners. I think we had 19 students we have 5,000 third graders. We had 19 who were not in those two categories, 7 of which wound up becoming placed in special ed. So it was not impacting a large number of our students.
Okay, and this was the same question. So according to the director of K-3 reading, this year's current third graders will be subject to the promotion requirement if they do not meet the required score on the reading portion of AzMERIT, which is equivalent to falls far below. So the results of the spring 2016 administration of AzMERIT will be back before the end of the school year in time for promotion decisions to be made. This seems contradictory that this year's scores won't be used for determining third grade promotion. Yeah, and I think it's exactly what we just talked about.
And I was focusing on the scores that are coming out now.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really referencing 2016.
Right.
So.
In 2016, we will have scores. So at
Right.
that moment in time, then
Yeah.
move on when reading scores will be. Has the Department of Education released a technical document indicating no discrepancy of student performance when testing on computer and written booklets by ethnicity?
The technical report, I think, is due in December, so they haven't released a report. I did see some of the comparisons, and it was almost exactly the same. What they did was find students who in past performance are comparable, and then look at those students and how they did when students took it on paper versus students who took it online. 40% of the kids took it online, 60% paper this time. So they found kids who were comparable from prior performance, and then saw how they did on the AzMERIT itself. And the differences in their performance were not significant. In fact, were really small.
Let me answer that question. We just received notice from ADE that the data will be embargoed. So we will double check on that. Two things we'll double check just as we're going through the questions and let you know is about the embargo issue, which clearly is very important, and we have that on our radar. We just want to make sure we have a solid answer before we talk about anything. And then there's also been a couple of folks talking about the department letter dated August 27th about move on when reading. And again, because I know that took there's a lot of questions on that, we will double back on both of those items. How will Arizona Merit test special education students who have significant disabilities?
There is a new assessment they're going to have that's replacing Ames A, and I don't have a lot of information to discuss about it today, but there is a new assessment that they'll be using.
All right, we've come to the end of questions, and we are very, very appreciative, Dr. O'Reilly. What the coolest part is Mesa and Dr. O'Reilly will let us come here, but the whole state benefits from his expertise. So thank you again. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out the taped webinar this afternoon, as well as the PDF of the PowerPoint. And also our commitment to you is the last two items of doubling back on the embargo issue. That's already been on our radar. We already know that we want to make sure we have solid information for you. And then also the move on when reading, because there's a lot of confusion, and I think it's really a date issue more than a date issue. So thank you very much, and we'll see you for the next webinar soon.